Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today, in another unscripted movie review, we're going to be talking about this new film on Netflix from Charlie Kaufman. I'm thinking of ending things. So, full disclaimer, any film critic talking about Charlie Kaufman is working on hard mode. These are the sort of films that are layered and nested and tangled and often won't make a lick of sense to most people who aren't knowing how to engage with them. With the full acknowledgement of that, there's very much a possibility and a high likelihood I could get some elements of my interpretation wrong. Now, granted, every film experience is subjective, and given that this film is actually built off of an adaptation of a book from 2016 of the same name, I'm thinking I've got a pretty clear idea of what Charlie Kaufman's looking to go with this, but it's Charlie Kaufman. The man has built his career out of making the meta film, looking at Being John Malkovich, adaptations, Synecdoche, New York, and my personal favorite, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, which is probably the only film I think that nails the balance between truly heartfelt, gripping, emotional storytelling and the metatext that's interwoven throughout that movie. And also, that movie inspired a really fantastic Jhené Aiko album, but that's a different conversation. Now, I'm thinking of Ending Things is a bit of a difficult film to discuss because, on the one hand, you have the plot, and on the other hand, you have the symbolism, and on the other hand, you have the meta plot. And we kind of have to discuss all three parts in detail because how they interweave is kind of important. So, talking about the plot straight out, it is distinctly boring and distinctly uncomfortable in terms of how it is framed, because it's a psychological drama about this woman whose name is a little unclear, and that's part of the point, and she's going with her boyfriend to visit his parents. The key thing is, pretty much as soon as she gets in the car, before she even gets in the car, she's thinking she's gonna have to dump this guy. And it's not hard to see why. The two of them bounce off each other very distinctly awkwardly. You have the intelligence and style of somebody who are educated, who are well informed, but they also don't mesh. There's a lot of layered awkwardness in the car ride over, even as the snow starts picking up, and it doesn't stop from there. She eventually winds up meeting the parents, and it's consistently awkward and uncomfortable from there. And all the while, she has to realize, I need to leave. I need to go home. I need to get the hell out of this. All the while, the phrase is, I am thinking of ending things, is resonating, and you can clearly tell the initial meaning is this relationship is doomed, it's over, we're just waiting for that pin to drop. And you get the feeling he kind of knows it too, the boyfriend in question. Their relationship is interesting because you can clearly tell he is the guy who is maybe quasi-autistic or on the autism spectrum, maybe has Asperger's, and has a very clear superiority complex when it comes to the art that he creates, his own intellectual pursuits. His parents dote upon him, specifically his mother, almost to an obnoxious degree. And yet, the more you watch his dynamic opposite hers, you realize that she's all of this, but also on a different level. They share some hobbies. He likes to paint, she likes to paint. Oftentimes her career is described as similar to his to a distressing degree, but she always seems to know a little bit more, and she's got that element of socialization that he clearly does not have. I mean, he might dote upon his parents, who are clearly suffering under the effects of advancing age, but at the same time, does she really want to be stepping into the amount of work he's clearly putting in trying to sustain things? You realize that there's more going on beneath the surface, and when it comes to, as much as you want to think that it's centered on her character and everything that's telling her, get the hell away from this guy and dump his ass, you realize the story isn't really about her. And I do think that's a bit of a shame. In terms of the initial emotional gripping response, she's easily the most compelling character in this story for as much as her name is left a little bit obscured. The acting is truly excellent. I think that she captures the worried, kind of thinking that this might work, but there's a level of awkwardness that she knows deep down in her gut that it won't. But she can also see herself taking down those steps towards maybe making it work, because what else is she going to do with her life? And it has that precarious sense of psychological danger that lurks around every corner. As is often described, the running motif is that things are becoming treacherous. The road is becoming treacherous. And that road is pretty much a continuous motif and metaphor for her life going forward. A continuous straightaway into the dust, into the murk, into the blizzard ahead. And she can't quite pull away. She's always the passenger in this scene. That's actually important. We'll get back to that. The one thing that you'll also realize in terms of a lot of the stylization of this movie is that a lot of the color palette is decrepit. A lot of the scenes in the drive over, it's washed out, it's cold, it's white, it shows a winter of their discontent. It draws forth a lot of elements of melancholy, which is very key to a lot of her performance as well. The I'm thinking of ending things title could well be going beyond just, I think I'm ending this relationship, but I might be thinking of ending other things altogether. And it might be a thought that's crossed his mind too. But also going forward, they go to this farm, a return to the home, as apparently both of them grew up on a farm. There's a lot of commonalities between them growing up. We'll get back to why that's important in a second. But also, a big important metaphor that comes back is that when they go into this utterly decrepit farm, they find a spot where a pig had actually contracted maggots inside of him, and the maggots were eating the pig from the inside out. And you see that nested element of barely concealed corruption and decay that lurks all throughout this family unit that has been described. And that's when you actually get to interacting with the parents. You see some of that poisonous element that's lurked in. How it seems like it's kind of toxic from both them back and forth. That they might not be hurting each other, like physically, or maybe they are. There's left some implications by a certain bandage placement. And you start realizing if this was a house with this gifted kid or quasi-autistic kid growing up in a house of abuse, where the mother is doting but the father is dismissive, it leads to a much uglier scene, leads to that level of subtext. And you can tell the girlfriend notices it and starts realizing, oh shit, I could see myself falling into a lot of these exact same patterns. And the one thing you start noticing there is reality starts to bend around that farm, where you almost think it's going to start going into surrealist horror elements, except where things change specifically. The parents will age back and forth along certain points of their lives to show how it might have interacted with him, the boyfriend in question. You also get the implication that the boyfriend has achieved far less than he should have and has buried things, implying that he might be putting on a bit of a front and a face to have wooed this girlfriend. And there's one subtle costume change that you see with the girlfriend that comes up when they actually go to have dessert in the dining room. Note how her dress changes and how she gets pearls. That's an implication of domesticity that she almost intrinsically bucks against, but seems that she knows she could fall into that all too easily. And now that's a lot of the key metaphors that circle around that piece. Where the movie really started grabbing me is when they actually get in the car ride to start going home. And immediately they start talking about a movie by John Cassavetes from the 70s, which the movie was specifically about a woman, a housewife character, who gradually loses her mind and becomes erratic in the scene. Now, I haven't seen that movie, but the one thing that's drawn very, very plainly is that he's kind of sympathetic to the woman who is losing her mind in that scene, but the girlfriend character is not. She almost drops into a Pauline Kael-esque delivery where she scrutinizes and breaks apart the film piece by piece. And then you know exactly what Charlie Kaufman is doing, because again, whenever he references movie or TV shows or the continuity of life shown within the movie or within the TV show, you know he's also drawing an implicit condemnation of that specific family unit and the mother who would lose her mind, which she can tell, the girlfriend can tell, it's a load of old nonsense. I don't want to indulge in that unit, whereas he's a little bit more sympathetic. He's a little bit more sympathetic to the established narrative the way he wants it, whereas she kind of has contempt for narratives as a whole. And then you start seeing other weird things. Even though it's a blizzard, they stop off in an ice cream parlor, and you see two girls who are classically pretty and engaged with the one girl who seems that she's got burns all up and down one side of her arm. And that kind of gives you the impression of, oh wait, this could be the girls who rejected him versus the girl who bought in. And she's wondering who she is, and she sees the parallel of, oh, well, she could very well buy in. And then after that long, extended run at the ice cream shop and how things continue to curdle, they actually show up at his high school. Because, of course, a lot of these things internalize at the high school level, a lot of these insecurities. And while she will dismiss them time and time again, and she will try to find ways to walk away, he goes in one last time to try to confront some guy who thinks he sees the janitor spying on them in some way. I'm going to have to spoil the next part of this movie because it really does draw to the main forefront of why I want to have issues with some of the themes and how they're presented. She goes in the school, she confronts the janitor. The janitor's uniforms are also shown in the boyfriend's house on the farm. She goes down to the basement and sees the washing machine, exact same uniforms. And then you realize that the boyfriend, the older picture of the janitor, whose janitor's presence had some scenes interspersed throughout the film going about his regular ordinary life as the idle romantic as he was, because he actually has a scene where he sits down in a room and watches another old movie showing a classic romance from Robert Zemeckis, I think. And then you realize, oh wait, he is that idealized boyfriend character in reality. He's the guy who didn't get the girl, and he ultimately lost out. And now he's just a janitor who's maintaining things and kind of lost in his own head. And in that way, it did have some level of sympathy, because you can actually see how someone like that might not have found somebody else, and he took his shot. And there's a part of me that's kind of sympathetic, but also very sympathetic towards her, because it was never gonna work. And then things get weird. There's a dance sequence which shows a potential meeting. Shows these two actually having more of a romantic connection, potentially finding a romance down the line. And then a janitor presence interrupts this dance sequence with the two stand-ins, and the guy winds up taking a bloody hit, and he dies, and it cuts back to the janitor living his life as ordinary. And then he kind of has an emotional breakdown, almost like a seizure in the truck, his life flashing before his eyes, quite literally. And then the maggot-infested pig comes up and leads the janitor's bleary-eyed, naked body into a new scene, into an acceptance of the Nobel Peace Prize, or a Nobel Prize of some kind, where he delivers a short speech, a brief song from Oklahoma, which is another running motif throughout the movie, where he's always a fan of musical theater, and the girlfriend's kind of not really, especially given some of the underpinnings of that musical, and he's bought into the romance, because he can see that girl, his now wife, waiting in the crowd. And it's very peculiar with their makeup, how very starkly stylized it all is, and you can clearly tell this is aspirational focus for him, maybe something that he could have earned at the very end, and he sings that desire to go out into the world, and you can tell the parallel from the old man to the current boyfriend to the kid who is lost in his own mind, lost in the old essays, maybe caught up in hating that suicide is the answer, hating that nihilistic forefront, but also having that aspirational dream. But how much can that dream swallow up everything around him, everyone around him, even the girl in the picture who doesn't say no at the right times or say no enough? And admittedly, that's powerful. That's a good metaphor, but this is where metatext starts overrunning the issues with the actual text, and this is a problem with Charlie Kaufman, and I think it's a problem here. The main primary emotional locus of the film is the girlfriend, in terms she has the majority of the internal monologue, which is pretty consistent throughout the film, even as you kind of get the feeling that the guy is constantly reading her thoughts. And you get the impression that the majority of the emotional weight is placed upon her. And yet, in the twist of things, she winds up as a side character to the main guy who is once again the genius. And if you know meta commentary, because this is a Charlie Kaufman movie, he's also highlighting how at the end of the day, that misunderstood potential guy who is locked in his own head still has a dream that she can fall in, and it doesn't pull away. It still kind of places him in the hagiographical picture. There is never quite the moment where she says, I'm thinking of ending things, and then actually does. And that's telling of how someone will perceive metatext in a movie. The creator has the right to have her character say no, but she never does. So when the points in the third act where rape is implied, in terms of how one deals and presents their characters, it comes across a little bit weirdly exploitative. It feels like a lot of the metaphor was really stretching to make a pretty potent statement of her own liberation from that arc of the text, however, but she just becomes another character dragged upon the arc of the film from that male creator who's never quite send it up because the movie has to end with his stylized dream. Now, actually, in the book, this is something that actually happens, in that this girl was a figment of his imagination, and that he was writing down in manuscripts and layers of notebooks. And even in the confrontations in the actual gym, in the actual high school, she feels that she is constantly becoming a part of him, and that it's all in his mind. Whereas the book might have drawn the picture of, oh wait, this is actually kind of toxic, and this is not something how a creator should live. There's something that's a little bit more hagiographical to how Charlie Kaufman frames the final scenes, and I'm not sure I'm as fond of it as I would like. He's got an eye for the classical romanticism, and even an eye to deconstructing some of it, but at the end of the day, he can't quite fully stick the deconstruction, and he's gonna have to find some way to find a happy ending, at least for the guy in question. I don't know. It's a stylized movie. It's a fascinating movie. I think there's a lot of layers to the film that's certainly worth watching, even though it is deeply uncomfortable and awkward at several points and really does go on too long. But once you've decoded it, it's not a film that I find all that gripping. I feel like the emotional center is misaligned, and I honestly think that the acting mismatch, really the girlfriend character is so much better acted, and I think she is so much more of a magnetic presence. Maybe the idealized manic pixie dream girl, trying to make a point there. But I don't know. I feel like as much as she is idolized and placed in that role to make commentary upon it in the text, the acting performance gives her more life than, frankly, the rest of the film. And that is kind of disappointing, that it ultimately has to circle back to a moment that is as ossified and lifeless at the end. Because ultimately, the control of atmosphere and tension, a lot of the performances, the plot is layered and literate. If you can follow all the running references and motifs, it's certainly gripping. But at the same time, it's one of those films that doesn't quite captivate me in the way that the best Charlie Kaufman movies do. It's not another Eternal Sunshine, it's not another Synecdoche, it's not another Being John Malkovich, not another adaptation, God no. But I do see the appeal. I think for a lot of fans, this one has put them off from some of his movies. This one has lost some fans, but I see the impetus. I see where he's coming from with this one. So, light 7 out of 10. If you're curious, give it a watch. It's on Netflix. You don't need to go to a theater for this one. But sometimes, if you're going to make a movie all about the metatext of ending things, I'd really like the center behind that ending to receive her just desserts. Or at least a way that her road can lead in a different direction or curve away. Just saying. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I'm a little bit surprised I had this much to say about a Charlie Kaufman movie. Actually, let me scratch that. I'm surprised I was able to string out as much as I did in an unscripted fashion about a Charlie Kaufman movie. But hey, if you want to see it, check it out on Netflix. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if you guys actually want to get involved in my scheduling process so I can talk about more movies, at the highest Patreon tier, you can request them. Again, don't feel any obligation, because again, not a lot of movies are coming out, but hey, there it is. Have fun. Until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.